Hello, everyone. Thanks for your interest in our research. This is Liu Chengwei speaking. I am a PhD student from the Cyber Security Lab from Nanyang Technological University. In the following video, I will give an introduction on our work demystifying the vulnerability propagation and its evolution via dependency trees in the NPM ecosystem, and this paper is finished by Chen Sen, Fan Lingling, Chen Bihuan, Liu Yang, Pengxin, and me. Nowadays, third-party libraries have been widely adopted in modern software development to avoid reinventing wheels, which is proved to improve development efficiency and reduce time and manpower, and we have so many different package managers for different languages to assist such reuse of third-party libraries, as presented in the left figure. However, such heavy reuse of existing components also raises a new threat that user projects could be constantly exposed to security risks by vulnerabilities existing in third-party libraries from dependencies. Besides, known vulnerabilities also grows rapidly. There are more than 170,000 known CVEs from NVD's latest statistic, and every 1 in 4 data breaches are because of open-source vulnerabilities. Moreover, the complexity of dependency trees and the variety of dependency management in different ecosystems also make it even more difficult to capture and measure the impact of vulnerabilities from third-party libraries properly. All of these factors make vulnerability impact excessively amplified, and it is urgent to demystify the such impact and remediate these vulnerabilities properly, in the perspective of ecosystem. An NPM is one of the package managers that have the largest ecosystem and heaviest usage of third-party libraries. According to the latest statistic from NPM registry, there are over 2 million libraries published on NPM. There are also many existing works focusing on inspecting vulnerability impact in different ways. However, they are either only consider the vulnerability impact propagations via direct dependencies, or simply trace transitive dependencies by simple reachability analysis, which neglects the NPM-specific dependency resolution rules and could result in wrongly resolved dependency trees. As presented in the left figure, when we resolve the dependency tree of package A, we can easily find the dependency path from A to C at 1.0.0, D at 1.2.0 and E at 1.0.0, while E at 1.0.0 is a vulnerable package, and it will be counted as vulnerable dependencies of A. However, according to the NPM dependency tree resolution rules, since there is already a D at 1.1.0 resolved as one of the direct dependencies of A, and D at 1.1.0 satisfies the dependency constraint of the dependency relation from C at 1.0.0 to D. C at 1.0.0 will directly use the D at 1.0.0 that have already been resolved and selected in the dependency tree, rather than install a new D at 1.2.0. Therefore, the vulnerable dependency E at 1.0.0 would not be included during the installation of A's dependencies. Besides, because NPM embraces a flexible strategy on dependency management, for example, dependency relations can be defined as different types of version ranges. The installed dependency trees at different times also change dynamically. For example, in the right figure, after the release of B at 1.0.1, the defaultly resolved dependency tree of A at 1.0.0 will switch to take B at 1.0.1 rather than the previous B at 1.0.0 automatically, and such dynamic changes of dependency trees could also lead to the dynamic introduction and removal of vulnerabilities within dependency trees. Therefore, to demystify the vulnerability impact and its evolution in detail with NPM-specific dependency tree resolution considered, we first construct a Nallegda graph DV graph to fully capture the dependencies and vulnerabilities in the NPM ecosystem, and based on this, we also propose an algorithm DT resolver based on DV graph to simulate the process of NPM dependency tree resolution with no physical installation required, which can not only derive the dependency trees of user projects, but also identify all vulnerabilities and corresponding dependency paths that introduce these vulnerabilities. Besides, DT Resolver is also extended to support deriving dependency trees at different installation time. Therefore, we are able to carry out an ecosystem-wide vulnerability impact analysis, as well as the evolution analysis vulnerability propagation in dependency trees. Finally, we have also derived implications and adoptable solutions for different stakeholders to improve the severe situation of security in the NPM ecosystem. First, we introduce the construction and maintenance of DV graph. We first define the schema of DV graph as presented in the upper left figure. Basically, we have three types of nodes: library, version, and vulnerability, and 8 types of relations. Specifically, we have has, upper, lower to present the inner relation of libraries, and we also have depends representing the actual dependency relations from version to library, and the dependency constraints and the corresponding satisfying versions are kept as properties. For each depends relation, there should be a default relation from the same source version node to the version that should be resolved by default according to the dependency constraint. As for vulnerabilities, the effects relations present the existence of vulnerability in the connected versions, and libEffects presents there is at least one version of a library affected by the vulnerability. Based on this, we have built a set of data pipelines to construct and maintain the DV graph. The metadata pipeline crawls the metadata of all NPM libraries from NPM registry, and the CVE pipeline retrieves the CVE data feeds from NVD, and CVE triage pipeline is a semi-automated pipeline to assist security analysts to map CVEs to affected libraries and versions. The graph pipeline is used for DV graph construction or update. There are two main challenges during the construction. First, the diversity of NPM dependency constraints makes it complex to resolve satisfying versions. We propose and develop a robust dependency constraint parser based on node Semver to handle not only Semver version ranges but also version tags, GIT URLs, and remote links. Second, since the affected libraries and version ranges of CVEs are usually given in free text descriptions, it is difficult to automatically recognize with high precision. Therefore, we have devoted 4 experienced analysts to check the CVE mappings of affected library and version ranges by comparing with some existing famous vulnerability databases, for example, SNYK and SourceClear. Till we carry out the empirical study, the snapshot of DV graph we use have included more than 1 million NPM libraries and 10 million versions, as well as 815 vulnerabilities. The total storage side of dvgraph is over 15 gigabytes, and we have also released this snapshot of the dvgraph on our website. To facilitate large-scale studies, we propose a novel methodology on dependency tree resolution DT-resolver to statically resolve the dependency trees of packages based on the complete and well-maintained dvgraph. This dynamic figure presents the process of installing dependencies with NPM. Basically, it recursively resolved dependencies by BFS, and it organized the dependency tree in the way of physical tree that all transitive dependencies are supposed to be put in the root folders unless the previous installed version is not compatible with the dependency constraints. After this, it reformed the logical dependency tree from the physical tree of folder structures. There are also many trivial rules, for example, the preference of non-deprecated versions. During the resolution, we do not extend to the details here. We have also extend DT-resolver to resolve dependency trees that should be installed at any given installation time, so that we can reproduce the dependency trees in the history. To have an in-depth validation of DT-resolver, we have sorted out more than 100,000 library versions according to different criteria as presented in the left table, as validation set to check the accuracy of DT-resolver. The validation set occupies almost 1% of the entire NPM ecosystem, and we believe this set is representative enough. Besides, we have also involved the existing dependency resolution tool NPM Remote LS, which exactly analyzes dependency trees by reachability analysis, to compare the accuracy. According to the result, DT-resolver can resolve the same dependency trees with the result of real installation for 90.58% of library versions, and NPM Remote LS only can correctly resolve dependency trees for 53.33% library versions. There are two main reasons for the incorrect dependency trees. One is that the installation may not be complete due to missing environment supports, and we could have more nodes in some dependency trees. The other one is because we use NPM LS to collect the ground truth, but it deduped the dependency trees by default, which makes the locations of some nodes differ. Besides, we have also extended to compare the identified vulnerabilities and vulnerable paths with NPM Remote LS. We find that DT-resolver and NPM Remote LS both have high coverage on identified vulnerabilities from dependency trees. DT-resolver finds 98.1% of the vulnerabilities reported by NPM audit, and NPM Remote LS finds 97.7% of them. As for vulnerable paths, DT-resolver still have a high coverage that 92.6% of the vulnerable paths are successfully identified, while NPM Remote LS can only find 78.3% of them. This proves that even though the existing dependency resolution tool for NPM packages misses the NPM-specific rules on version selection applied during installations, they can still identify most of the vulnerable dependencies, because most dependencies in the NPM ecosystem are still resolved as the highest satisfied version. But such missing rules make the vulnerable path identification compromised, which exactly influences the analysis of vulnerable propagation in dependency trees. Based on dvgraph and DT-resolver, we are able to carry out the ecosystem-wide empirical study on vulnerability propagation via dependencies, as well as the evolution of vulnerability propations along with dynamic dependency tree changes. First, we use DT-Resolver to calculate the dependency trees of all 10 million library versions, and based on the results, we study how many packages are affected by existing known vulnerabilities, and how do these vulnerabilities propagate to affect root packages via dependency trees in the NPM ecosystem. Next, we extend to time dimension and investigate the evolution of vulnerability propagation via dependency tree changes. We take 50,000 library versions from the validation set to calculate all dependency trees from their release to experiment time, and we obtained more than 10 million dependency trees in total. Based on these dependency tree changes, we investigate how do known vulnerability propagation evolve over time. How long do they live in dependency trees? Why are there so many vulnerabilities unable to be automatically excluded by dynamic dependency tree changes? And based on our findings, we carry out an application of DT-REAM to remediate vulnerabilities by avoiding them from being introduced in dependency trees. Here we skip the detailed experiment and analysis procedures and only present some interesting findings due to the time limitation. Through our study, we conclude that, first, we statistically proved the wide existence of vulnerabilities, the dependencies of NPM packages, that over 1/4 of library versions from 20% of libraries contain at least one vulnerability in their dependencies, and the latest version of 16% of libraries contain at least one vulnerability in their dependencies. Second, vulnerabilities from direct dependencies are widely neglected. We find over 30% of these affected library versions have vulnerable direct dependency. Third, each vulnerability from dependencies brings 8 vulnerable dependency paths on average. Fourth, known vulnerabilities are causing a larger impact over time. Only the numbers of affected dependency trees, but also the number of vulnerabilities in each dependency tree. Fifth, most vulnerabilities are introduced into dependency trees before they are discovered, and most fixing versions of them are released before they get published. Based on these timely releases, 90% of the vulnerable dependencies can be removed along with time. Averagely still takes a year, but there are still 40% of vulnerabilities unable to get thoroughly excluded. Considerable user projects contain unavoidable vulnerabilities even though we have exhausted all possible dependency trees. If you are interested in the details, please refer to our paper and website. Based on our findings, we have also proposed an application DT-REAM to remediate vulnerabilities within user dependency trees by integrating forward checking and backtracking during the process of dependency tree resolution. Currently, most of remediation provided by existing tools only simply adjust users' direct dependencies to remediate vulnerabilities. For example, there is a vulnerability in I, and they usually only alter the version of B and C to influence I. As for our DT-REAM, we integrate the vulnerability checking into the process of dependency tree resolution. When resolving I, DT-REAM firstly check whether there is a clean version of I. If no clean version can be resolved, it turns back to redecide the version of H. If no version of H can get rid of vulnerable I, we further trace back to redecide the versions of E and F, until no more upper dependencies can be redecide. We compare the NPM official tool NPM Audit Fix to validate DT-REAM. We find that DT-REAM outperforms in 77 projects and NPM Audit Fix outperforms in 30 projects, from the aspect of reducing vulnerabilities. While this is because sometimes NPM audit fix violates the semantic version range to remediate vulnerabilities, while DTReam strictly follows the rules. Besides, in 16 projects that DTReam and NPM audit fix reduce the same number of vulnerabilities, DTReam removes more vulnerable paths. From the results, we can find that there are still a lot of projects containing vulnerabilities that cannot be removed by adjusting dependencies. That is all of this video. Please feel free to visit our website and drop an email if anything you are interested and you want to discuss with us. Thank you very much.